The mission of FSU Coach is to prepare and equip the next generation of coaches and sports professionals with best practices and current research to enable them to pursue excellence. We have 2 academic programs, the online graduate certificate, which is 4 classes, and also a 10-class master's in athletic coaching. Our graduate certificate and master's program can be started at any time, either the summer, fall, or spring.
The types of classes that we offer focus on the athlete as a whole person. We focus on the theory and practice, the research, the helping skills. I came to FSU Coach because I truly believed in the mission and the purpose of the program.
I think I have my dream job being a head coach at Florida State, but I know there's always more ways that I can help my athletes and better prepare as a coach. If you're interested in going into coaching or joining the FSU Coach program, I would just say don't even think about it and do it.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to FSU Coach Live. We're normally in a summer break, but I wanted to have an opportunity to talk to a guest from a book I read. He was the author of this book called Ballistic, and I got my copy here. Henry, thank you so much for joining me. Very interesting book, but before we get into that, just tell us a little bit about your background, how your interest in sports, and how you ended up writing this book.
Sure. I grew up in Portland, Oregon where the only pro sport is NBA basketball. And so a lot of my, after school time was dribbling and imagining I was like Terry Porter or Clyde Drexler and, you know how it goes. And
I do.
Yeah, I love basketball from a young age. And then I went to NYU journalism school, and it never occurred to me that I could actually work in sports. That seemed like there were other people in my class who were like, oh yeah, I'm going to do sports journalism. And I was like, I don't even think that's a real job. It just seemed like too much fun or something. Like you didn't get to do that. And then a few years after college, I'd been working in like regular journalism. As a favor, a friend asked me if I would go and ask Jason Williams, the power forward of the Nets, a few questions for a basketball magazine. And she felt like she was asking me like I was kind of like it wasn't up to my standard or something, but I was super excited to get to do that. And to be honest, I pivoted to basketball. I mean, it was the 90s. And I've pretty much been a basketball journalist ever since for magazines. And then I started a blog. It was one of the first basketball blogs on the internet called True Hoop. And then ESPN acquired the blog. And then I was ESPN for a decade and ended up running a big team of 60 people, including David Thorpe, whose son Max Thorpe was an FSU basketball player until a couple years ago. And so I've there's a lot of FSU in our conversations, and also I'm a women's soccer fan. I know you guys are always crushing that game, but yeah. But anyway, yeah. So I then in the pandemic, I've always wanted to write a book, and I honestly was writing about intensely negative stuff like money laundering or doping, all this kind. And I was like, I just want to write about something that's like positive and constructive, and quite frankly, like feels better to think about while you're falling asleep at night. And I was like, what are the things in sports that are like truly like worthy of a book and kind of positive? And then I immediately thought about this guy, Marcus Elliott, who's a Harvard doctor who like has this whole program that we'll talk about where they're preventing injuries instead of just reacting to them. And so I called him up, asked him if he would participate in a book, and it only took me like 3 years, and now we're done.
Yeah. From your perspective as well, though, you talk about your own experiences in the book of being injured, and I think any of us who have been athletes, and even those of us who haven't been athletes, we get injured, and your book really suggests that there's many ways for us to avoid that. Can you talk a little bit about your own experiences of how this book or learning about this book impacted you?
Yes. I talk about this a lot in my personal life. The model is cardiology, right? We if you look at the history of cardiology, it was just we didn't see the signal for the noise for thousands of years. People would drop dead of heart attacks, or they would be rushed to the hospital, and we didn't. All the doctors had different theories, or they thought it was because that person had thought evil thoughts, or it literally was in the literature this kind of idea that it was God punishing you, and then they developed the electrocardiogram and later the echocardiogram, and they could see that upstream from the heart attack was the blood flow slowing through the arteries for like a decade or more. It was measurable before the crisis. So now we treat, it's like one of the most successful interventions in human history is, you know, we all go get our regular checkups. They're looking for the signals of this. And if you have, 10 years out heart attack, now they prescribe diet, exercise, maybe some medicine, and you never have the heart attack, right? So this became Marcus's life mission, is essentially to apply this thinking, this kind of scientifically rigorous search for what's upstream for the crisis. For like, he had an ACL tear on his 17th birthday. Actually, he tore 3 ligaments on his 17th birthday in football practice, and kind of wiped him out. It ruined a lot of his sports dreams. So he's like, let's figure this out. And he went through Harvard Medical School, working with these top physiologists in South Africa. He worked with the Patriots and the Mariners, just kind of looking for what is the electrocardiogram of these injuries, right? And it took a long time of searching. They had brain scanning equipment. He used his naked eye, looking at people's gait, etc. And eventually they land on a granular movement assessment. So this looks kind of like you're going to be in a video game where they put the markers all over your body and you move around for an hour and it collects 1 million data points. And in that data set is all sorts of crazy, interesting signs. So I went through that. In the course of writing the book, I was born with hip dysplasia, and I've had kind of one of those people who's had lower back sort of concerns throughout my life. Every now and again, I'd be going to some physical therapy or whatever. And it happened that in the middle of writing the book, I had the worst attack of that, and I could barely move. It was really hard. It was a really hard part of my life. And I had decided not to become a client of the place I was writing the book about because I didn't want to ruin my journalistic objectivity. And after months of me being just not getting better fast enough, Marcus was like, listen, I know you got your journalism concerns, but can we assess you and can we try to help? And I was desperate enough that I did. And to me, it was kind of wild. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I went out there and I did the jumping around. And honestly, like within a few days of doing their specialized targeted to me workouts to stabilize my right hip, I was running up a dry creek bed barefoot, like leaping from rock to rock. And within a few months, I did this. I don't know if you know what High Rocks is, but it's a very demanding kind of CrossFit type competition with 8 kilometers of running. And I did one of those a few months later. And then, it's not that my back problems have permanently melted away, but I'm in a different category now of, I know what's wrong with my body. I know I have to activate my glutes and move a little differently and train a certain way. And this is, I believe, my kind of arterial blood flow for my issues is like, I got to like address that thing, which is upstream from, what looks like on an MRI, like a really messed up bunch of vertebrae, but I can kind of like manage it with this soft tissue intervention, which is pretty cool.
A lot of coaches in particular, but we could also add athletic trainers, physical therapists, etc., may not have this training that Marcus has, and may have never even been told about prevention. We spend most of our time looking at what is the cure? How do we fix the problem before the problem happens? And your book was very enlightening in the sense that we need to be more cognizant of doing the things right so that the bad things don't happen. Within your book, there were a couple of areas that really kind of maybe put a light bulb on me, not only as an individual who competes, but I think for anybody reading it, you're talking about the hips as being very crucial to all these other injuries. And so, I've got lower back problems, I've got knee problems, I've got ankle problems, and the book seemed to say, yeah, but what about your hips? Can you extrapolate a little bit on that?
Yeah, at one point, and I was writing the first chapter of the book, I told Marcus there were 3 chapters about the hips, and he was like, what? He was like, how could there possibly be 3 chapters on the hips? So, as a biomechanical being, right, we're when you're doing athletic things, you're putting big forces, into the ground. That's how you jump, right? Or you're putting big forces down. That's how you run. But the way that this sort of like the high school physics of how it works, those big forces pretty much roll through the hips every time, right? If you're jumping or running, your hips are going from flex to extended, right? That's pretty much 100% of Sports Center highlights or someone doing that. But 80% of our mass is in the torso, and arms and head all together. So that's like free falling in athletic movements, and then the ground is the other big important thing in the physics of this, right? So there's like a collision coming,
Yeah.
and it's too much force for our body to handle if we don't have legs, right? And the legs are the springs that we use to land well. That's 3 stack joints: ankles, knees, hips, which working together like synchronously can cope with massive force as well, right? If you have those 3, they're designed to work really well. The one that's designed to take the most force is the hip, right? It's this super mobile joint, second most mobile joint in the body, and it's just surrounded by all these muscles and ligaments and soft tissues that can really move and really absorb a lot of force. Ideally, most of the force landing goes into your glutes, right? This is where, and then as you land, whether you're running or jumping, those glutes are going to, the muscle tissue is going to stretch, and then without you having to use a ton of energy, if you can relax enough into that landing, they're going to rubber band, snap back to send you off with a little bit of free energy into your next step or jump. So that's what should happen. That's how we're designed. And if in their giant database of what goes awry with all these different people who are in pain, or these are top NBA players are going in there all the time, and they're finding this is one of the major places they find that something's a little off. Maybe are tight, maybe they're unstable. Those are the 2 big categories, and either one will keep you from moving well and athletically and avoiding injury.
And the body is pretty amazing in the sense that it can adapt to maybe your deficiencies and can protect and hide them for a long, long time until that one moment where boom, something happens. And I immediately thought of your book when Jason Tatum went down in the NBA
Me too.
Playoffs, where he just moved and his Achilles said, no, I don't think so. And from that perspective, we really do compensate until we can't compensate anymore. One of the interesting things within your book as well is you talked about landing and whether we land on our toes and whether we land on our heels. And what you were talking about was maybe a little bit different to what maybe most coaches teach, which is, we should be landing on our toes, and then to allow ourselves to absorb all that impact. And your book says maybe that's not the best way.
This is one of the, I don't personally have a position here, but this is one of the places that I'm aware there's an ongoing sort of almost fight about this, right? And so Marcus came to this. He was just watching Olympic runners, right? And they're in an interesting category because if they do anything inefficiently, they won't be Olympic runners, right? They have to hit the ground perfectly. And do it yourself. If you watch it in super slow-mo, it's kind of fun to do. It's absolutely beautiful to see this perfect running. But if you have, I don't even have such a good eye. Some of these people at P3 they just see people moving with more detail than I do, to be honest. They can see all sorts of stuff, but pretty much everybody has not pretty much everybody. In an Olympic final, everybody lands on the ball of their foot with their toes a little up. And then the foot's going to land. It might look, the foot might come in like this. It might look like it's going to be on the hill, but right at the time of impact, it's on the ball of your foot. And the reason for this is that if you land on your toes, the force of landing, which is this massive force I was talking about with your whole torso mass coming down at the ground, it has to be expressed through all the soft tissue and the little bones of your foot before it gets up into the really useful work it's going to do in your calves and your quads and your glutes, where it's going to flex and spring. So there's this inefficiency, which is why you don't see people making Olympic finals landing like that. I think they do, honestly. If we look at Usain Bolt's first 4 steps out of the blocks, maybe that he does. But as far as once you're getting bouncy and moving down the track, but Marcus really landed on that with when he was in South Africa, this physiologist place, they put some of the best runners in the world on treadmills, and they were doing all sorts of things. And they found that the best runners in the world just didn't get tired, even though their VO2 max wasn't better. Every part of their physiology they can measure wasn't different than the almost as good runners. But what they weren't measuring was something Marcus saw with his naked eye, which was they were just bouncier, which in his training taught him was probably injury preventative, because that bounce is this it's basically the springs that protect you from hurting your back or your hip or whatever, your knee, was if you land really forcefully and hard. So he kind of had this like intuition, and then eventually they built this giant movement lab with the infrared cameras in the ceiling and the force plates in the floor, and they started really testing, how do people move who end up not getting hurt, and it confirmed what he had suspected, which is this kind of landing on the ball of your foot with your ankle loaded, with the force passing immediately on landing, from ball of your foot to calf to quad to glute. You feel it in your glute when you land if you're doing it right. That is injury preventative and has a performance benefit too.
Almost like a trampoline effect as you hit the ground.
Yeah, totally. Sorry, one other little note there. They make a big deal about like you don't want the ground to just hit your foot. Like your foot should hit the ground, right? It's a two-way conversation. So you want to be active in your foot, right? You want to be, they say, come in loaded, right? You want to have your Achilles, ready for this force, which takes some building muscles of the lower leg to be adept at that and to do it so it doesn't just blow out your calves. But anyway, yeah, you want to. You're a participant in this. You're not just letting the ground just slap your feet.
And this is a very, very specific question, and if you don't know the answer, that's okay. One of the things that I've noticed in some athletes is maybe when they're doing a box jump, jumping up onto a platform or something, just before they go to jump, they shift their feet so that one moves in front of the other, and then they push off more from one foot. And my own son does this, and I've noted it to him, and he's really struggled to just jump with both feet together. Is this, because your book kind of touched a little bit on this, and so my memory's a little sketchy, but is this something that's okay, or should we be teaching athletes to jump to a specific form?
So that's a funny one that you mentioned that, because this did come up, and I don't think the things I learned are in the book. But so my coworker David Thorpe at Troop, when he coaches basketball, he would do this thing where he puts like an empty soda can behind your foot, behind your heel, and then as soon as you step, you just send the soda can flying, and it kind of is a little trigger that is pretty effective. And so I had it in my head when I went to P3, like, oh, well, this is this really stupid thing to do. But Eric Liedersdorf, who's the head of biomechanics there, showed me this study where baseball MLB players who steal bases sometimes they call this the negative step, right? So before you're about to take off that way, you throw one leg back, and it doesn't slow them down. And no one knows exactly why, but the idea is that same loading the springs thing that I was talking about, like maybe, and you're going to lose some inches in putting your foot back, but maybe you're doing so much a better job of elongating your, calves, quads, glutes, etc., that you're actually a little faster. So I think the answer is we don't have a definitive answer, but I used to make fun of it, but now I don't anymore, because maybe it's good. That makes sense.
And I think the lesson here is that one size doesn't always fit everybody. And
definitely.
We see that so often, though, in gym settings with strength and conditioning coaches, et cetera, where you have to do it this way, whereas maybe your body is different and can do it a different way to what other people are doing.
That's actually a core finding of P3. So they had all the data from all these NBA players on the servers, and then they had machine learning just kind of churn through it and group the athletes by type. And there's a pretty consistent 7 types of movers in the NBA. And that seems like how all their data comes out, is like, some people, when they land, their torso like goes pretty horizontal to the ground, and some people keep it super vertical, and on and on. There are all these little habits, and there are many different okay ways to move. But I think the real trick is you want to move like you. So like they really advocate, a big topic for them is return to play, right? And their big advice, I think they're actually get kind of disappointed and mad at how like the surgeon will dictate X number of weeks after the event, you're probably good for X, Y, and Z activity. But they're like, no, we don't want to, like the calendar doesn't know how you're moving, right? We want to, like, you should return to play when you move like you, right? So if you have an assessment, a baseline assessment, then we're going to keep assessing you. And when your hips move like they used to move, like, and when your ankles are flexible again, et cetera, now you're greenlit to go back, not because it's 12 weeks or because one leg's within X% strength of the other leg. I think these are kind of, these methods I think are a little bit on the chopping block of history, because they're just going to learn better ways to know who's ready to go.
Yeah, and I would also add that there's so many psychological variables that come to return to play that the surgeon may say, well, you're 100% healthy, you're good to go, but mentally you may not trust your body, and as a consequence, maybe place loads on things that normally don't have loads because you're not ready mentally.
Well, and one of the biggest predictors of injury is prior injury, which already tells us we're not doing it right, right? Like that means they weren't ready to come back. And yeah, in my own case, they saw me do a bunch of movements where my right hip would be unstable, and the question was it because I didn't have the musculature to hold the hip stable, or was it because I was scared to land because I've been in a ton of pain, right? And so the assessment can't tell you that, to your point. And basically we learned that I was scared to land because I was in so much pain, right? I was 30% different between my left and right, the forces on one side versus the other, because I was shifted to the good side, which is a really great predictor of injuring the good side, right? Yeah. And so we had to sort of carefully try in the gym. Well, can you do this? Can you do that? And kind of see, was it my brain holding me back, or was it my hip muscles? And turns out it was my brain.
Yeah. Shoes were an interesting one as well that you talked about. And of course your area of expertise is basketball. And it was very interesting to read, well, these shoes are no different to these other shoes. They just look good. And that's why the athlete wears them, even though they may not be beneficial for their injury prevention. Can you expand a little bit on just what you wrote in the book about shoe development and what we know about what is a good shoe?
It's so crazy. I mean, I think we all just, like, the shoe companies have tons of money and they spend tons of money, but they don't spend it on the thing that we think they're spending it on, right? They're not actually putting 35 different shapes of shoe on an athlete and seeing which one makes them move the best. Like, that's not a thing that's been happening, or if it is happening, I'm not aware of it. And there's this some academic journal articles basically saying that there has never been an athletic shoe that demonstrates like meaningful injury prevention. Like, what? Mostly I think it's because it hasn't been studied. But maybe some of them are good. But there's a guy in the back of P3 who's just tracking NBA injuries per shoe model. And there kind of seem to be some trends there that, like, why don't we know about this, right? You would definitely want to know about this. And when they make a shoe custom, basically it means they ask the athlete, do they like it to be squishy or not squishy, and what colors they like. But we haven't really had this rigorous, I mean, it's kind of like running shoes are wildly varied and zero drop and all these different types. And so there's been a little bit in running of reimagining the traditional shoe. But in most shoes, we have this 10 millimeter drop from heel to toe. And there's no science behind that whatsoever. It's just a tradition of sports shoes that goes back to, like, they happened to make them like that in the early days, and people got used to the feeling of that. And if you think about it, that means that Shaquille O'Neal has his foot at a very shallow angle, and your 4-year-old has their heel at a super high angle because they have the same height heel. And at P3, they routinely ask NBA players and others to take their shoes off for explosive movements because they don't want you to land toes down, right? And your shoes are making you land toes down. So if you're landing, jumping off a box or something, they'll just make you take your shoes off because it's safer to land with no shoes on at all until we get researched shoes, which they're working on. They have agreements with 3, I think it's like Nike, Puma, Adidas, maybe. They're starting these more in-depth creative projects of, like, what are the biomechanics of a shoe.
And I think that was one of the really valuable takeaways from the book, was just, you have to start considering the type of shoe that you're wearing and what it does to your foot while you're wearing it, as opposed to, well, these feel nice, or these feel, as you said, squishy, so that must mean it's going to protect my knee. And the book you're saying, no, that's not the case. Just because it feels comfortable, or just because it feels like it's protecting your knee, you may actually be more likely to injure yourself.
Well, certainly what might be happening is that you feel safe because it's squishy landing on your heel, for instance, which is absolutely worse for your knee. So if you land on your heel, which is not so common, or even if you land like super toes down from a jump and then your heel slaps down, those are the biggest measurements to have at P3. So you wouldn't do that barefoot because it would feel too jarring. It's just too weird. But you have this little bit of cushion, which makes your brain think, I can land any old way. It sort of blinds your foot a little bit. They want your foot to, like, prepare for the ground, and you're unprepared because you don't really feel it. If you just take people's shoes off, they notice people tend to, like, their running form improves and they get springier and they're more on the ball of their foot. So it does feel to me like we're coming up on some changes in how we do this. And the other thing is, they measured one NBA player landing with 11,000 newtons of force, and I kind of hated physics class, and that number didn't mean much to me, but it's triple the amount necessary to fully sever a human spine, which is the most disgusting way for me to say that. But so your little bit of foam, it's ancillary to the forces that we're talking about, right? It's just not, it'll change the feeling, but it won't do much about the injury impact.
You even suggested weight training barefoot, doing your squats barefoot. And that in itself is something that people would look at and go, well, I don't know about that. But I did it, by the way. As soon as I read that, I was out in my son in the garage, like, hey, I'm doing this barefoot. No more shoes.
Nice.
We're gonna do this right. There's small things that I think the challenge we have in this field is that we can't prove that we stopped the injury. We can show that we're less likely to cause an injury, but it's almost like sports psychology. Well, how do I know it works? Well, I don't have the data to show that you're more mentally tough, so to speak, or that you handled that situation better with less anxiety because you were just in that moment. But it's this idea that conceptually, if we can do these small things, we may have saved you from. And that can be a hard sell when we go into maybe sports organizations, sports teams, and say, hey, you really need to start looking at this. How do we, maybe as coaches, go to an athletic director and start arguing for more injury prevention support rather than we need an athletic trainer to take care of all these injuries that we're getting?
I mean, do you want to be the cardiologist who's just kind of guessing at, why these people are dropping over from heart attacks? Like, I think history is going to really frown on this, right? Like, I know it's tricky. I know it's new. And what it's even scarier is, like, the key data is not something most of us are familiar with, right? Like, this granular movement data, like, it's scary to kind of pivot your career to something that you didn't study in college, right? Like, I get it. It's scary, but that's if you want to help the athletes, that's where the solution is. So, like, this guy, Mark McCown from the Utah Jazz, is a figure in the book, and he's a kind of a wild, fearless, he's a giant man, and he's just sort of a, like, totally unrestrained guy, right? And for whatever reason, he was like, I got to figure this out. And he just flew to Santa Barbara and just started asking 10 million questions. And then people are like, yeah, no, like, they love Mark, but they're like, he asked an annoying number of questions. He just tried to learn, right? He just got super curious. And I feel like, curiosity can be kind of humbling, and it can be kind of hard, but I feel like that's where the answers are. We just have to be, I mean, I was an idiot. I flew there with just nothing but questions. I was Mark McCown. I basically just had to learn, because I think and to be honest, I just went there with my daughter as a graduation present from college, because I'm like, I think this is where she's an athlete, and I think she's going to want to know this, right? So I just think to me, if you're curious and looking for where the answers are for making athletes feel better, work better, run faster, jump higher, have fewer injuries, like, I think this is our next challenge. And I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but I also, we also don't all have to be cutting edge researchers, right? Like, there are some practical lessons that kind of fall out of this. And it does seem pretty clear that, you can apply a lot of the lessons without a biomechanics lab.
I think more globally, there's going to be a challenge to change the perspectives of health insurance companies, for example, who understand now that, hey, maybe if we get Tim to do a colonoscopy, we can save ourselves a boatload of money for when, in case to stop him, or to recognize that he might be at risk of cancer or whatever that may be. At the moment, health insurance companies, in particular, when it comes around exercise, my insurance company doesn't even reward me for being physically active. I think we have a lot of growth to do in this field nationally before organizations and insurance companies, et cetera, start rewarding prevention rather than treatment.
You're so right. You know what? I have an MRI where I could get expensive back surgery anytime I want and it'd be covered, right? Like, but if I wanted to do this, really groundbreaking work where I'm actually going to work on fixing it myself and feel really good and be active and not end up getting heart disease or whatever I would get. No, I have no interest. They haven't paid a penny for that, right? Like it's totally crazy. Yeah, and not everybody has access to this kind of advice. Not everybody has the resources or even the gym where you would do the exercises. But I ultimately I land on, boy, I don't know what you'd spend your money on that would be more valuable than being able to move. Right. To me, like we're in this broken system where we don't prevent things, which is so crazy to me. But in the meantime, like I still want my hips to work, and it's none of these things are cheap, but I do feel like I don't know where else you go to get this comprehensive an answer.
Yeah. When I read your book, I was honestly a little bit jealous that you got to go get yourself fixed and repaired, because many of us are broken in some way from our athletic endeavors, maybe when we were younger or maybe even now. I raised my hand here.
Yeah, what's going on with you? What do you got? Let's go.
Yeah, right. We'll talk about that long story after the show.
Okay.
But when I read that, I thought, I would love to be able to go and get this kind of help. And I know P3 is kind of exclusive and very inaccessible for many. But are there places where just the regular person, maybe the regular athlete or coach or whoever, may be able to go get some kind of support like this? Or is this, we are just at the infancy of this, and there really aren't any places around?
I mean, the short and dirty answer is, but I didn't actually go to P3. I went to their sister business, which is 100 yards away. It's called the Lab,
Okay.
the Lab in Santa Barbara. And so that's where regular folks, you have to be a pro grade athlete to go to P3.
Okay.
But the Lab is for people who just want to get the P3 assessment, and then they'll give you, if you're there for a week, they'll give you 3 workouts that you then attune to your body that you then take home. And I find it to be kind of amazing. So you could go there and then you can live anywhere and do your workouts at home with the little videos on an app on your phone. I think though, in the book, I spent years bothering the staffs of both of these businesses with what are the lessons that do apply generally to the rest of us? Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot to start with there. One of the big ones is every single pair of hips they've ever assessed needs help. I think because we sit so much, but it needs help in either mobility, so kind of like more yoga type movements, or with stability, which is more weightlifting type movements. And I think we tend not to have both. So, and I think we probably already know, everybody listening to this, which category they're in, right? Are you good in yoga class? Then you probably need help with weightlifting. Are you good at CrossFit? You probably need help with yoga. And I'm using yoga and weightlifting as sloppy catch-all answers, but
sure.
The idea is that instead of just doing the one that you're good at again and again and again for decades, which is what most of us do, you should do the one you're bad at. You should add it to the mix. And if you can get your hips so they're just generally mobile, generally stable, there's some illustrations in the book of just how you could do a little home check of which category you're in, then your likelihood of aging with grace in your hips is like so much higher, right? And just knowing that, I think, is a big one. And I think another one is probably not nearly enough of us do plyometrics. So just, there are a lot of ways to learn plyometrics. It can be totally free. You can learn an okay way from YouTube, but you want to teach your body how to hit the ground. These ground contacts are a major, like, glaring red finding of P3, where you want your foot to hit the ground in a good way with the neurological firing, snappy, which you have to practice, right? It's stuff like, it's like jumping rope. Jumping rope is a entry-level plyometric, but there are a bunch more. And in this crisis of women's soccer, of ACL tears, they have these programs that are shown to reduce ACL tears by like 65, 70%. And they're multifaceted programs, but they've been around for decades. But at the core, they're teaching people how to land. It is this, it's a neurological process to stick your foot out in a way that is strong and ready to receive the force of the ground. And this is something we should all practice, not just for ACL reasons, but for all the biomechanical reasons. And I go to a lot of gyms. I've been working out my whole life. Like I never see people do plyometrics almost ever. Maybe jumping rope a little bit, but you very seldom see like little hurdles or bounding or all this stuff. But that's at P3, you see it every athlete every day. They're doing all kinds of plyometrics, and then eventually building to really big, aggressive ones, which you don't want to. This is not safe for starters, but like
Right.
like clearing boxes, these tall boxes. Once you get neurologically sound handling these massive forces and in a way that your body's you're pretty darn robust at that point. Your body's ready for like an NBA game where you're not going to get hurt.
Yeah, so true. And my wife and I have been watching the NBA finals over the last few weeks, and we continue to be astonished with the ability of these athletes to jump up and often land in awkward positions. And I think that's where the plyometrics and the strengthening of the joints really saves you. Because if we just do as many, and I'm not going to throw strength and conditioning under the bus here, but as many strength and conditioning coaches often do, they're very regimented movements in one direction that develop one area of the joint. And then when they go and move in space and have a defender or have to cut or get hit while they're in the air and have to land in a different position, all of a sudden their body's like, well, we're not prepared for this. This wasn't in our training manual, so to speak. To me, that's where the plyometrics come in. Am I accurate there?
Yeah, for sure. So it's, there's 600-ish muscles in the body, and the way that you move beautifully and athletically is not with like these three that we worked on, right? They work in symphonic ways. And when you isolate them, you might strengthen them, but you don't teach them the neurological coordination, right? So this is like a giant orchestra, and there's a conductor, which is your brain. And it is way too slow for you to think about how you're going to move, right? When you're landing or doing these NBA, a collision in the air at the rim, and then you're going to put a foot out. Like you have to put that foot out in a way that your subconscious has the orchestra is going to work well in this very important moment, right? And so, one of the really dumb looking things that they do is just to stand on one leg with your knees slightly bent and then just close your eyes and just balance there for 30 seconds. Some of it, there are different parts of our brain that manage balance. Some of us are very visual in that. And so if you're looking at the rim, then you won't have a good balance on the ground because you're not even looking at it, right? So this is something that you can train. The first time you do it, some people can just do it, which is awesome. But a lot of us are like, whoa, after 20 seconds, you're wobbling all over. But the fifth time you do it, a couple weeks later, you're much better at it, right? So that's the very base layer of, you can improve the neurological firing of your big symphony of muscles. It goes on and on. This is why people at P3 are, standing on a box, stepping off laterally, landing on one foot, and then leaping forward onto the next box, or on all these different varied things, or stomping. There's some video of Luca like stomping on this little diagonal platform, he'll do like almost like feet of fire, but one foot's on the platform, and then he'll explode sideways, right? And you're giving your they talk about it, it's like putting the keys in the ignition of a sports car and you just leave it in the driveway. Like somebody's gonna drive it, right? And you give your body all these neurological tools to move all different cool ways, and then when you're playing, you don't think about it, you just go play, but you have all these different practiced methods that you can deploy. You can reach for these different tools, and you can land on your left foot and then just immediately go left, right, back, diagonal, all that kind of stuff. And you can see the results. It's pretty cool.
Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I do want to be able to provide people with information about you, whether they want to contact you after watching the show, listening to the podcast, whatever it is, and also access your book. What's the best way for them to do that?
I'm trying to put, I give myself a B at this right now. I'm trying to make henryabbott.com a place where you can kind of keep abreast of everything that's happening. There's a form there where you can fill out and reach me, and it'll just come to my email inbox. I would be happy to hear from anybody with any questions you have. And honestly, since I've been talking about this book in public, I've had an alarming number of, people reach out with things like, my son. I just met a guy whose son has been injured for 2 years of college sports, 2 sports for 2 years. He's been just completely injured. And we just talked it through, and he ended up flying out to Santa Barbara and it seems like it's doing much better now. So I'm not here to sell you on P3 or the lab. I'm here to sell you on the idea that the key of preventing injuries is in granular movement data, right? And that's going to come to all of us over time, maybe through some app, maybe through some technology I haven't thought of yet, but it's coming. I feel like it's good news. Prevention for sports injuries is in the works. It's in the pipeline.
Well, Henry, thanks so much for joining us. And of course, if anybody does have questions, I hope you reach out to him. That's a wrap for today. Just a reminder, we try to do these during the semesters, fall, spring, every couple of weeks. Bonus one this summer, which was, of course, Henry. So thanks again. But be sure to subscribe, like, follow wherever you're watching. We'll see you next time.